Hi everyone, today I'm going to paint this chili pepper and I hope that you will sketch and paint along with me. Supplies for today: I've got a pencil and eraser, round brushes in size 0 and 8, water, tissue and a palette of paints. Today I'm going to be using my Mijello Mission Gold paints. Mijello makes two ranges of paints. It makes Mission Silver, which is a student grade paint, and Mission Gold, which is an artist grade paint. This Mission Gold set comes with 36 5ml tubes that you then squeeze into the wells of this very well made palette that comes with the set. The paper I am using today is Baohong 100% cotton cold press paper in 300 GSM or 140 pound weighting, and I've cut it to a size sort of between A4 and A5. I will also be using masking fluid and this silicone masking brush for a small section of the sketch. I am now going to start with a pencil sketch of the chili pepper. You can sketch along with me, or if you would prefer, there is a free downloadable and traceable sketch if you look at the link in the description box below or at my website, which is travelsketcher.net. On the website you will find links to all of my tutorials as well as the free downloadable sketches. Last weekend some friends and I rode our motorbikes and scooters up to the top of Doi Suthep mountain in Chiang Mai, Thailand. Up at the very top of the mountain there is a Hmong hill tribe village, and at the village there are vendors selling all sorts of fresh fruits, vegetables, honey and coffee. I was really struck by the bright colours and the size of the chilies that were for sale there, and that's why I'm sketching this one today. This eraser that I am using is called a kneaded or a kneadable eraser. It's got a putty-like consistency in that it is easy to change its shape and to squish it around. This kneaded eraser has advantages in that firstly it doesn't make any shavings whilst you are erasing, but more importantly it is much kinder and gentler on the cotton fibres of the paper and doesn't cause damage to the paper when you are erasing. I will start by misting my paints with a water spray bottle to activate the paints. Now I want to mix the base layer of the green that I'm going to use for the stalk of the chili. I find that the colours in this Mijello Mission Gold palette are quite a lot brighter than a lot of the other brands of paint that I own, and some of the colours are unnaturally bright. I'm going to start with the sap green that is in the palette here, but that is almost a fluorescent green when it's seen on its own. So to try and tone it down a bit, I'm going to add a little bit of Hooker's green. That has toned it down a bit and is a bit more natural looking now. And I think that if I water this down quite a lot, it will be a suitable base layer colour for the green stalk. I'm not going to do any ink work in this sketch, and I want to erase some of the pencil work that I've done because I don't want the graphite of the pencil to show up at the end. So now with a very watered down mix of the green that I've made, I'm going to put the base layer green down for the stalk. I'm going to water it down and make this layer really light. It is just the base colour and the lightest colour that I can see on the stalk, and I'm going to build on this colour in additional layers. So I will just take a little bit of the colour that I've mixed and keep adding a bit of water to it to keep the layer as light as I possibly can. Whilst this light base layer is still wet, I'm going to drop in some darker colours now into some of the darker areas. I'm going to use Hooker's green and then drop some of this darker green into where the stalk meets the chili, as well as the end of the stalk and the underside of it. Because the base layer is still wet, it will start blending naturally, but then I will rinse off my brush and dab it dry a little bit and use a clean, dryish brush to blend the colours to where I want them to go. I want to retain the lightest areas of the stalk, and so in those areas I want to push back the dark colour and keep the lightest colour showing from underneath. Whilst there is still some moisture in this current layer, I want to push some of the darkest areas even darker And I'm going to add some burnt umber to the hooker's green, sap green that is already on my palette. This will make a much darker green, and I'm going to then drop that into the darker areas. I don't want there to be too much paint on my brush at any time, otherwise it will blend too far. So I will pick up small amounts of paint as I'm moving along the darker sections. I want to make sure at all times to preserve the lightest areas that I laid down. Because this layer is slowly drying, the color that I put down now will not blend as far as the colors that I put down before it. And that's exactly what I want. I want this darker color that I'm putting down to stay exactly in the areas where I'm putting it now and not to blend too far. I'm not happy with how much some of the darker color that I've laid down has shifted up into the lightest areas of the stalk. So now I'm going to use the lifting technique to lift some of the darker color that I have put on top. In order to do that, I'm going to rinse off and then dry my brush slightly. When I do that and I now pass this dryish brush over the color, it's going to lift any of the color that is on top to reveal the lighter base color that I put underneath. I will keep doing this in all the lighter areas of the stalk until I'm happy enough that the lighter color is showing through. I can do this lifting technique as long as the paint that I've put down hasn't dried yet. Now that my first layer of green is completely dry, I want to push the darkest areas of the green stalk even darker than they are already, so that I can increase the contrast that is on the stalk. I needed that first layer to be completely dry because I don't want any of the color that I've put down in the first layer to shift when I put this darker layer on top. So I've put a little bit of clean water onto the green stalk, not too much, but just so that the color that I put down can blend slightly. Then I'm going to mix up a dark green color combining indigo with the hooker's green. I'm happy with this darker green that I've formed, but I want a thicker consistency, so I'm going to add a little bit more of both the hooker's green and the indigo. With this thicker consistency, darker green color already on my brush, I'm going to drop it straight into the areas of the stalk where I can see the greenest color is the darkest. Because my paper is not very wet and the consistency of the paint on my brush is quite thick, you will see that when I drop it in on the paper, it doesn't blend or shift too far. That's exactly what I want. I want it to stay in the darkest areas, so I'll drop it in there and then do a little bit of blending outwards. I am going to use this much smaller size 0 brush to help me with the blending now. I'm using it because its small size means I can be a little bit more accurate with my strokes, and also it holds a lot less water. So I can wet it, dry it off, and then do some quite accurate blending where I know that the color isn't going to spread too far. I am now going to use masking fluid to mask off the white areas on the chili that I want to retain as highlights. I am going to use Winsor & Newton masking fluid, and to apply it I'm going to use a specially made silicone brush. This is really just a silicone point that I can dip into the masking fluid and then apply to the paper. You could just as easily use a toothpick or something sharp pointed to apply the masking fluid to the paper. I am going to pour some of the masking fluid into one of the wells of this plastic palette. I will use what I need to, and then the masking fluid just dries and easily peels off out of the well once I'm done. So I will use the silicone brush to put the masking fluid onto the areas where I want to preserve the white. One thing I wouldn't ever do when using masking fluid is use one of my good brushes to apply it. Some people suggest that you can use your good brushes to apply the masking fluid provided you cover the tip of the brush with dishwashing liquid before you dip it into the masking fluid. I have tried that once with one not so important brush, and it had to end up in the bin at the end because the masking fluid still got into the bristles. So I'm just not prepared to take the risk of putting masking fluid anywhere near one of my good brushes. I'm going to let this masking fluid dry naturally before I start my next painting layer. It's very important that you don't use an air gun or a hairdryer to dry the masking fluid, because that can cause it to get very brittle and tear the paper when you remove it. So once you've got masking fluid on your paper, you won't be able to use a hairdryer to dry any parts of the sketch moving forward. So whilst this dries, let me show you some of the highlights of our trip up to the Hill Tribe village that day. I am now going to start mixing the red colour for my first layer of red. In this Mijello Mission Gold palette, the true red colour is called Permanent Red, and I'm going to make up a very watery solution of that. I want this to stay wet the whole time that I'm working with it, so that is why I'm making it very watery and very light, and then laying it down over the whole surface of the chili. Now that my watery base layer is down, I'm going to mix up a thicker consistency mix of the permanent red and start dropping that into the areas of the chili where the colour is more intense. I want to leave the top area of the chili the lightest because that is where the light is hitting it. So I will work in from both sides, the bottom and the top side, putting in the thicker consistency there and blending it towards the centre. If the colour moves too close to the area that I'm trying to preserve as lighter, I will rinse off and dry my brush slightly and then lift the colour in this top area. But as I do that, I will still continue to keep dropping in the thicker consistency of paint in the darker areas where I'm wanting it to go. I will slowly just keep on adding the thicker consistency to increase the colour in the darkest areas and blend it out towards the lighter area. I know that this is going to dry lighter than what I'm putting down, so I'm happy to push the colour a little bit darker than the way I'm expecting it to finish because I know that it will dry lighter. As long as this layer hasn't dried, I can continue adding in the thicker consistency in the areas where I want the colour lighter, but at all times I'm trying to maintain the contrast by keeping the lightest areas light as well, so that I can get a large range of reds between the very light to the very dark. I want to work on this darker ridge area now that this layer is completely dry. So in this layer I'm going to work on this area as well as the bottom of the chili, which is also in shadow and needs to get pushed darker. I'll put a bit of water down in the area that I want to work in and then mix up a thick consistency mix of the permanent red again. I'll put this thicker mix in at the bottom of the chili and then rinse and dry off my brush a little bit and use the brush to blend the colour upwards. I just want to say that the best effects of this blending and layering comes in when we are using 100% cotton paper. If you are using any other kind of paper, you might find that the layering doesn't work so well, or you may get pilling of the paper because it isn't able to handle multiple layers of watercolor. You will see that as I add my additional layers on top, the dry layers underneath simply do not move. And that's not the case if you use something like multimedia paper. I find if I use multimedia paper, then when I do add additional layers on top, the layers underneath do start shifting again, which is not what we want when we are doing multiple layers. I think that the area where I want this dark ridge to go has dried quite a lot, so I'm going to put some water down again and then mix up the thick consistency of the permanent red and drop that in along the ridge line. You will see that as I put the darker red down along this line that it doesn't blend or move out very much at all. That is because firstly I haven't put too much water down on the page, and secondly the paint that I'm dropping in is of a very thick consistency, which means it's not likely to move very much even though I've got some water down on the page. This is exactly what I want. I want this dark line to be prominent, and then I will rinse and tap off my brush and slowly blend this color outwards. This color contrast that I'm starting to build in this layer really does start to create the three-dimensional look to the chili. Layers like this really do take a lot of time and patience, but they do result in a very three-dimensional look to what it is that you're painting. I want to push the contrast at the top of the chili now so that I can get a bit more of a curved look to that edge. So I'm going to mix up the thicker consistency then again on my big brush. I then realized that I wanted to put some water down first, so I don't want to lose the paint that's on my brush. I'll use my small brush just to put some water down on the edge, and then I will use my loaded brush to drop the paint in along the top edge. I will rinse off my brush and then use it to blend the color outwards. I'm really making sure to not go near that lighter ridge line that I am trying to preserve along the top ridge of the chili. And then I'm always trying to push the contrast as much as I can. So before this dries completely, I'm going to do one more pass over the very dark ridge on the side of the chili, moistening it slightly and then adding the thicker consistency of paint once again. Now I want to work on the dark shadow line down the side of the chili. I'm going to mix up a medium consistency mix of the permanent red and bright clear violet. The names of some of these Mijello paints are quite different to other brands. I would say that this bright clear violet is quite close to a carbazole violet in another brand. Either way, I'm going to use a dark purple to push this red to the really dark side. Then I'll lay down a little bit of water on the ridgeline and then put this thick consistency mix down that ridgeline and then blend it outwards. I'm actually going to cover the whole chili with water first because I don't want to have an edge to the water and then I put the color in and then I'm going to get a little line around where the water ends. So I'm going to cover the whole chili with water, but not too wet, and then drop the shadow color in along the ridgeline. Then I'll put some of this shadow color around the very bottom of the chili, and then blend the two shadow lines outwards. I really love how the more layers you put in and the darker you push the contrast on the dark end, the more the sketch starts to pop and look more three-dimensional. I will use the opportunity whilst there's still moisture left in this layer to keep pushing the darkest darks as much as I can, but as much as I push the darks even darker, in equal measure I will make sure that I keep lifting the lighter areas so that I do get the full range of contrasts and that I'm not just making the entire sketch darker and darker every layer. Whilst this layer dries, let me show you the coffee shop that we went to whilst we were in the Hmong village. It was a little bizarre because the coffee shop was set up in a school. We had to walk through the school building to find this coffee shop that had a beautiful view over the valley. And it did seem like the barristers in the coffee shop were all aged between about 6 and 13 years old. So I'm not quite sure what the deal was, but I must say that we did have a delicious cup of coffee here. Now for the fun part, the shadow layer. I'm going to mix a very, very watery mix of the bright clear violet mixed with some ultramarine deep. I want to get a very light purplish green color to make my shadow. I start just going for it, but then I quickly lose confidence and want to pencil it out first. I don't want the pencil line to show when my shadow is finally down, so I'll work really lightly, but just to make sure that I get the shadow in the right place, I'll put the pencil outline down and then fill my shadow in after that. I really want to maintain the brightness and the freshness of this sketch, so I'm going to make sure that I don't go in too dark with this shadow layer. It's always possible to push something darker, but a lot more difficult to make it lighter if you've pushed it too dark too early on. So I will start with the color really light and fill in the whole shadow area with this lighter color. Once that's down and still wet, I'll go in with slightly thicker consistency of the shadow color, closest to where the chili touches the table, and then blend it outwards. I will make sure that I try and maintain the outer edge of the shadow as light as I can, and just to have the darkest area right underneath where the chili rests on the table. I'm going to remove the masking fluid now by rubbing it with my finger. I just make sure my finger is clean and dry. There are erasers that are made for this purpose, but I find that this works just fine. Now I'm just looking for some finishing touches. I'm going to moisten up some of the green that is just remaining on my palette, and I'm going to add a little bit of texture to the stalk. I will just add some lines and marks so that the stalk doesn't look completely smooth. Then with the shadow color that remains on my palette, I'm going to add a bit of a shadow line where the stalk meets the chili. And then I'll add just a little bit of a shadow on this side of the bottom of the stalk. And then this area looks a little bit light, I'll just make it a bit darker. Once it's completely dry, I will remove the masking tape. I'll turn the masking tape over and then fold it back on itself and pull it off at about 180 degrees. Pulling it upwards can cause the paper to tear, but I find that rolling it backwards like this results in the masking tape not causing the paper to pull up with it. And there's the final sketch. Thanks for joining me today. Please hit the like button below. Until next time, bye for now.